The day I came home from serving my country, I drove to my own house and a stranger answered the door. She was holding my coffee mug, living in my home, because my husband had sold it, while I was at sea, using a document that said I had lost my mind. He did not just take our house, he emptied our daughter's entire college fund. He forged a dead doctor's signature to make himself my legal guardian. And he disappeared to Florida before I even landed in Norfolk. He thought I was finished. He forgot one thing. He forgot about our daughter. And what she had been quietly building for 8 months while he was destroying everything would cost him everything he thought he had won. This story is for every woman who has ever been underestimated by someone who should have known better. Stay with me, because what happens next will remind you that truth always finds its way home. If this story made you feel something, anger, recognition, relief, or hope, you are not alone in that feeling. Thousands of women have sat exactly where Maggie sat, and thousands more are sitting there right now, not yet knowing that fighting back is possible. If you believe this story deserves to be heard by someone who needs it today, a friend, a sister, a colleague who has gone quiet, please share it. That single act of passing it forward may be the most important thing you do this week. And if you would like to hear more stories like this one, stories about courage, accountability, financial independence, and the quiet strength of women who refuse to disappear, subscribe to this channel. Hit the bell so you never miss what comes next. Leave a comment below telling us what moment in this story stayed with you. We read every single one. Like this video if Maggie's story mattered to you. Share it if you know someone who needs to hear it. And subscribe if you believe that stories like this one are worth telling. We will be here every week with another story that refuses to stay silent.
The phone on my sister's kitchen table buzzed at 6:43 in the morning, and I did not move to answer it. I had been awake for most of the night, not the restless, tossing kind of awake that comes from stress, the completely still, completely silent kind that comes from shock, the kind where your body just stops, where it cannot decide what to do next, so it does nothing at all. The kitchen smelled like old coffee. Rain tapped against the window above the sink in a steady, patient rhythm, the kind of rain that has nowhere to be. Outside, the trees in Diane's backyard stood dark against a gray Virginia morning, and I sat at her kitchen table in the same clothes I had worn for 2 days, staring at a piece of paper, not a bank statement, not a letter from Derek's attorney, not even the photographs Claire had shown me of our house with someone else's furniture in it. A power of attorney. 4 pages. Official language. My name, Margaret Ellen Crawford. Printed at the top in clean block letters. My date of birth, my social security number, my signature at the bottom of page 4. A signature I did not write. And in the section labeled Reason for Granting Authority, in typed, legal. Permanent language. My husband of 26 years had written the following words. The principal is experiencing early-stage cognitive decline, affecting her capacity for sound financial decision-making. I read those words for the 11th time that morning. I am a United States Navy commander. I have spent 18 years in uniform. I have served on 3 ships and commanded 2 departments. I have made decisions under pressure, in darkness, in hostile waters, with other people's lives depending on me getting it right. I have been evaluated, assessed, reviewed, and certified by the United States military more times than I can count. Not once, not one single time, had anyone questioned my mind. But, according to the document on my sister's kitchen table, my husband had walked into a notary's office with a forged letter from a physician and told the world that his wife could no longer think for herself. And then he had used that lie as a legal weapon. He had used it to sell our house. He had used it to drain our accounts. He had used it to transfer our savings, my military salary, my deployment bonuses. 26 years of building something together, into accounts I had never seen. And then he had left. driven south to Florida with a woman I had never met, while I was standing watch on a ship in the Pacific, believing I was coming home to my life. My name is Margaret Crawford. Most people call me Maggie. I am 52 years old. I am a mother and a veteran, and as of 8 days ago, a woman who has lost almost everything she spent a lifetime building. But I need you to understand something before I tell you the rest of this story. I said almost. And the difference between almost and completely is my daughter. This is what happened. All of it. And if any part of what I am about to tell you feels familiar, I need you to keep listening, because this story is not just mine. I stepped off the shuttle at Norfolk Naval Station on a Wednesday morning in October, carrying a duffel bag and 18 months of accumulated exhaustion. Norfolk, the word itself felt like an arrival, like a door opening after a very long time in the dark. I had been at sea for a year and a half. The Pacific deployment had been my longest and my last, after 18 years of service. I had submitted my retirement paperwork before we left. This return to Norfolk was not just the end of a deployment, it was the end of a career. I stood on the tarmac for a moment before heading to the transport vehicle. And I just breathed cold October air, American soil, the particular smell of a naval base, diesel and salt water and coffee from the mess hall that I had known since I was 24 years old. I called Derek from the pickup area. No answer. That was not unusual. Derek rarely answered when he was in the middle of something. I left a message. I am at Norfolk. Should be home in about 90 minutes. I love you. I did not know. Standing in that parking area at Norfolk Naval Station with my duffel bag at my feet, that the house I was driving home to had new owners. I did not know that the accounts I believed held $340,000 held $14,000. I did not know that my daughter had spent 8 months in quiet, careful terror, watching her father dismantle her mother's life piece by piece. I knew none of that. I just knew I was coming home. The drive from Norfolk took about 45 minutes. I passed through the tunnel, up through the familiar stretch of highway, and turned into our neighborhood in Chesapeake, with the particular warmth of someone who has been away a very long time. The oak trees, the white colonial houses, the sidewalk where Claire had learned to ride her bicycle without training wheels and fallen twice and cried once and gotten back up. Then I saw the sign in front of our house, not for sale. Sold. I actually laughed. A short, sharp, confused sound, because my brain could not process what my eyes were sending it. I thought there had been some mistake, a number transposed somewhere, a neighbor's sign in the wrong yard. I pulled into the driveway. A woman appeared in the doorway of my house, 40 or so, pleasant face. She was holding a mug I recognized immediately, because I had bought it myself 7 years ago at a craft market in Annapolis, a yellow mug with a sunflower on the side. She was holding my mug in my house. Can I help you? She said. This is my house, I said. Her face changed. Oh, she said quietly. Oh, no. Her name was Patricia. She was kind, and she was innocent, and she showed me the closing documents with a gentleness I will never forget. Page after page of official paperwork. My signature on every line that required it. Signatures I had never made. I do not remember driving away from my own home. I only remember ending up in a gas station parking lot on Route 17. Engine off. Both hands still on the steering wheel. I called Derek 17 times. Not one answer. Then I called my daughter. Claire answered on the second ring. I could hear in her voice that she had been waiting. Not for a normal call. For this one specifically. Mom, she said. Not a question. Not a greeting. Just my name. Said the way you say something you have been bracing for. Claire, I said. He sold the house. A silence. Then, quietly. I know. Mom, where are you? An hour later, I was sitting across from my daughter in a diner off Interstate 64, and she was opening her laptop. And the world I thought I understood began to come apart at every seam. Norfolk had been the last place I felt safe, the last place I still believed my life was waiting for me. Everything after Norfolk was something I would have to rebuild from the ground up. She did not apologize when she sat down. That was the first thing I noticed. Claire slid into the booth across from me, set her laptop bag on the seat beside her, and reached across the table to take both of my hands. She held them for a moment. Then she looked at me steadily and said, "Before I show you anything, I need to tell you something first." "Okay," I said. "I have known something was wrong for 8 months. I did not tell you while you were deployed because I did not have enough information to know how bad it was. And I did not want to put you in danger thousands of miles from home with nothing you could do. I want you to understand that decision came from love, not from keeping secrets. And I am sorry for the weight it put on you today. I stared at my daughter, 23 years old, third year pre-law at George Mason. The same stubborn jaw I saw in the mirror every morning, and her father's dark eyes, which right now I was finding it very difficult to think about. 8 months, I said. 8 months. She confirmed, and I have not been idle. She opened the laptop. It started. She explained, with a phone, last January. Claire's battery had died during one of our Sunday calls. She borrowed Derek's phone to finish the conversation. When she handed it back, she noticed a name appearing repeatedly in his messages. Vanessa Price. Not once or twice, dozens of times. Timestamps at 2 in the morning, at 6 in the morning, during our family calls. She did not read the messages, but she started watching. I am studying law. Mom, she said. And even through everything, I felt that pull of pride in my chest. We spend the first year learning how to see what other people overlook. So I looked. The next file she opened was a bank statement. Our joint account, the one Derek had proposed managing to simplify things around the time I received my deployment orders. The account that, when I left for sea, held $340,000, 18 years of salary, bonuses, and careful saving. Every dollar I had set aside during every deployment, every missed holiday, every birthday I spent at sea instead of at home. The current balance on the screen was $14,200. I sat very still. Where did it go? I whispered. Claire turned the laptop. Transfers. Dozens of them, ranging from $8,000 to $45,000 each, moved into an account I did not recognize, then withdrawn in cash, or routed to what appeared to be a joint account, opened in the name of Vanessa Price. 14 months of systematic, deliberate theft while I was serving in the Pacific. He has been moving money for at least 14 months, Claire said. Probably longer. This is what I could document. She paused. Her hands were steady on the keyboard. Mom, there is one more thing. I already knew, somehow, before she opened the next folder. Parents know. Some cellular, wordless knowing that lives in the body and not the brain. The folder was labeled Claire Education Trust. Established 2003. I closed my eyes for just a moment. That account. We had started it the year Claire was born. Military family allotments. Birthday checks from my parents before they passed. Holiday money. Tax returns. Every spare dollar for 23 years. It was not a gift. It was a promise. A promise that our daughter would never have to choose between her education and her debt, between her future and our limitations. What is the balance? I said, without opening my eyes. Silence. Claire, what is the balance? $1,847. I put both hands over my mouth. From across the diner, I heard the clink of coffee cups, a burst of laughter from another booth, the ordinary sounds of a world continuing without interruption. And at our small table in the corner, my daughter reached across and held my wrists. Mom, I could not speak. Mom, I know what that account meant. Every dollar in it. I know where it came from. I know what you gave up to put it there. Her voice was careful and quiet. And I am telling you right now that we are going to get it back. Every dollar. But I need you to hear me. I looked at her. Dad did not just make bad choices, she said. This was a plan. And I found something in the paperwork that changes the legal nature of everything. But I need you to meet someone first. Who? His name is Bob Haynes. He is a retired JAG attorney in Hampton. I found him through the Veterans Advocacy Office at George Mason. I have been working with him for 3 months. I stared at my daughter. You hired a lawyer. I am pre-law, she said simply. I know what this looks like. And I knew we were going to need someone good before you came home. I looked at her for a long time. This young woman across from me, who had carried 8 months of fear in silence so that I could finish my last deployment without the distraction of knowing my life was being taken apart behind me. This child I had raised through deployments and absences and too many missed evenings. She had protected me while I was protecting everyone else. Okay, I said finally. Tell me everything. That night, I sat in the guest room of my sister Diane's house in Richmond with a folder on the bed in front of me and a cup of tea going cold on the nightstand. Diane Holloway is 4 years younger than me and has never once in her life been accused of underreacting to anything. When I arrived at her door that evening, she opened it, took one look at my face, pulled me inside, and said, "He messed with the wrong family." Then she made tea and set up the guest room and sat with me for 2 hours, while Claire walked us both through everything she had gathered. The folder was thick, 47 pages of bank statements, account records, transaction histories, real estate documents, and legal filings. Claire had organized it with the precision of someone who had been rehearsing this presentation for months, which she had. I went through it page by page. The financial picture was exactly as devastating as the numbers at the diner had suggested. Derek had begun shifting money approximately 14 months before my return from Norfolk. Small transfers at first, the kind that looked like routine account maintenance, then larger ones, then withdrawals in cash, untraceable. Our retirement savings account, funded primarily through my military salary over 18 years, had been drawn down by $212,000. On page 31, I found records of a property transaction. Our house, sold 6 weeks earlier, $287,000. Proceeds deposited into an account I had never seen, held jointly by Derek Thomas Crawford and Vanessa Ann Price. I set that page aside and kept going. On page 47, there was a yellow sticky note in Claire's handwriting. "Mom, this one is the most important. I wanted you to see it with Bob present, but I needed you to know it was here." I unfolded the document beneath it. Durable power of attorney. Margaret Ellen Crawford. Principal? Derek Thomas Crawford, agent. And in the reason for granting authority section, the words I had now read 11 times since the previous night. The principal is experiencing early-stage cognitive decline, affecting her capacity for sound financial decision-making. Documentation from attending physician provided. Below that, a reference to a Dr. Gerald Marsh of the Chesapeake Medical Group, a letter on official stationery, dated 14 months earlier, citing early onset mild cognitive impairment and recommending immediate transfer of financial authority to the spouse. I read the letter twice. Then I set it down on the bed. Then I picked up my phone and searched for Dr. Gerald Marsh. Chesapeake Medical Group. The first result was an obituary from the Chesapeake Gazette. Dr. Gerald Marsh, retired physician, retired in 2019, passed away in November of 2021. He had been dead for nearly 3 years. The letter bearing his name and signature had been dated 14 months ago. He sat on the edge of Diane's guest bed for a very long time. The rain had stopped. Through the window, I could see the dark shapes of the pine trees in her backyard, standing completely still. Here is what I understood in that moment. Derek had not simply stolen money. He had not simply sold our home in my absence and fled to another state. He had done something far more calculated and far more cruel. He had told the world that I was losing my mind. He had invented a medical condition. He had forged a letter from a dead physician to make it official. He had used that forgery to construct a legal document giving himself complete authority over every financial decision in my life, on the grounds that I was no longer capable of making those decisions myself. He had tried to erase me, not physically, legally, on paper, in official records, in the eyes of title companies and banks and notaries. He had tried to reduce me to someone who could not be trusted with her own name. I am a Navy commander, and this man who had slept beside me for 26 years had looked at a notary across a desk and described me as mentally diminished. Something happened inside me in that moment. Not anger. Exactly. Not grief. Something quieter and more durable than either. A decision. I picked up the phone and called Claire. I read it. I said when she answered. "I know," she said. "The doctor is dead." "I know, Mom." "This is a forgery." "Yes, and Bob knows everything." "Everything," she said. "He has been expecting your call." I looked at the document on the bed in front of me, at my name in someone else's lie, at the signature that was not mine. "Tell Bob we are meeting tomorrow morning," I said. 7:30, she asked. 7:30, I said, and for the first time since Norfolk, I felt something other than devastation. I felt ready. Bob Haynes' office overlooked a small marina in Hampton. And when Claire and I arrived at 7:29 the next morning, there was a cup of coffee already waiting at the chair across from his desk. He was 68 years old, with white hair and reading glasses, and the particular stillness of a man who had spent 30 years in JAG watching people try to get away with things they could not get away with. He did not waste time on pleasantries beyond handing me the coffee. "Mrs. Crawford," he said, "I have reviewed everything your daughter provided, and I want to be direct with you because I believe you deserve directness more than you need comfort right now." "Please," I said. He opened a folder, my folder, the same documents I had read the night before, now tabbed and annotated in red ink. A durable power of attorney granting one spouse complete financial authority over the other on the basis of medical incapacity requires documentation. A formal physician assessment, verified medical records, in most cases. A second opinion. He looked at me over his glasses. "What your husband provided was a letter on the stationery of a physician who had been deceased for nearly 3 years. I found that last night," I said. Bob nodded. "Claire found it 4 months ago. She has been very thorough." He turned to the next tab. "Under Virginia law, power of attorney executed using fraudulent documentation is void from its inception. It has no legal force, which means every transaction Derek Crawford made using this document, every account transfer, every withdrawal, and the sale of your property was executed without legal authority." I held very still. "How many charges are we looking at?" I asked. Bob listed them in the tone of a man reading a grocery list. Calm, precise, one by one. Forgery of a medical document, fraudulent execution of a power of attorney, financial fraud against a protected service member under the Service Members Civil Relief Act, unauthorized transfer of jointly held marital property, wire fraud, for moving funds electronically using fraudulent authority, 5 separate felony-level offenses. Claire reached under the table and squeezed my hand. "What about the house?" I asked. "The buyers were innocent," Bob said. "They purchased in good faith and will be fully protected. But Derek is liable for making them whole, meaning he will be required to compensate them completely out of whatever assets we can reach, and my retirement accounts." Bob allowed himself a very small, controlled expression that was almost a smile. "Military retirement benefits are not marital property under Virginia law when fraud is involved. His access to those accounts depended entirely on the fraudulent power of attorney. The moment we establish that document is void, which we can, every transaction becomes reversible." I put my coffee cup down. I looked at the window. The marinas outside was still in the early morning, the water flat and gray, a few boats rocking gently at their moorings. I had spent 18 years looking at water from the wrong side of it, always moving, always away from home. "There is one more element," Bob said. "Tell me." He leaned forward slightly. "Your daughter told me you were writing to former colleagues." "Your commanding officer?" "Senior enlisted." "Yes, I contacted 3 people. Captain James Whitfield and 2 others." "Captain Whitfield called me yesterday," Bob said. "He and 2 of your sailors are prepared to appear personally if needed, not just written statements. In person." I stared at him. "They drove and flew here," Bob said. "For you." I had not expected that. The idea that James Whitfield had put on his dress uniform and traveled to Virginia for a woman he had served alongside made something in my chest go very tight. "There is something else," Claire said beside me. I turned to look at her. "I got a call," she said carefully. "Last night, after we spoke, from Gary Crawford, Derek's older brother." "Gary called you," I said. "He called me," Claire confirmed. "He said he found out what Derek did. He does not want to be on the wrong side of this. He is willing to speak with Bob." I thought about Gary Crawford, a quiet man, a contractor in Richmond, someone I had always liked. He and Derek had grown apart in recent years. I had noticed that and not known why. Perhaps now I did. "He knew something," I said. "I think he suspected." Claire said, "And I think he stayed quiet too long. And now he wants to do the right thing." Bob wrote something in his notes. "I will contact him today." He closed the folder and looked at me directly. "Mrs. Crawford, I want you to understand something, and I want you to hear it clearly." I met his eyes. "What was done to you is not unusual," he said. "I have represented military families for 30 years, and financial abuse of deployed service members is more common than anyone in this country wants to admit. Your husband targeted you specifically because your absence created opportunity. He targeted your mind specifically because it was the most effective way to remove your legal standing." He paused. Financial abuse is abuse. It does not require physical contact. It does not leave visible damage. But it is one of the most devastating forms of control one person can exercise over another. And I want you to hear that from someone who has seen its effects for 3 decades. I sat with those words for a moment. Financial abuse is abuse. I had not had a name for it until that moment. Now I did. What happens next? I said. Bob picked up his pen. We file, he said, and we let the truth do its work. 3 weeks after meeting Bob Haynes, I found myself on the bathroom floor at 2 in the morning, not in crisis. I want to say that clearly, but emotionally in a part of yourself that believes in the future you built. Yes, there was a night when the structure of my certainty came very close to failing completely. The legal process was moving, but it was moving at the speed of institutional machinery, which is to say slowly. Subpoenas had been served. Banks had been contacted. A forensic accountant had been brought in to trace 14 months of transfers. Bob was methodical and brilliant, and I trusted him completely. But Derek was in Florida with access to funds we had not yet fully traced. He had a 14-month head start, and I was sleeping in my sister's guest room at 52 years old with $14,000 in a bank account and a retirement I had not yet confirmed I would see. I had been lying in the guest bed for 4 hours, staring at the ceiling, running numbers that would not add up no matter how many times I arranged them. The house was gone. The savings were gone. The college fund was gone. Every concrete, tangible thing I had pointed at when I thought about security had been removed. And the question I had been avoiding for 3 weeks finally surfaced. What if it does not work? Legal processes fail. Evidence gets challenged. Perpetrators hide money in ways that even good lawyers cannot reach. What if, at the end of all of this, I was 52 years old, alone, without my house, without my savings, and the system had not managed to make it right? I got out of bed and sat on the bathroom floor. I know that sounds strange, but there is something about cold tile and a small enclosed space that felt honest in a way the guest bed did not. The bathroom did not pretend. It just was what it was. And then I did something I had not done since I was 24 years old and standing on the deck of my first ship in the middle of the night, terrified and a long way from home. I talked to myself out loud, not to God, not to anyone, to myself. The way a commanding officer speaks to someone who has forgotten who they are. Maggie, I said quietly, to the empty bathroom. You are not starting from nothing. That was the thing I had lost sight of. I had been measuring my situation by what had been taken. In doing so, I had forgotten to count what remained. My daughter, who had spent 8 months protecting me while I was protecting everyone else, who was sitting in a law school application process and building a future on her own terms, regardless of what her father had done. My sister, who had taken me in without hesitation. My colleagues, who had driven and flown to Virginia and were prepared to stand up in a conference room for a woman they respected. My 18 years of service. My commission, my record, my mind, which no forged letter from a dead doctor could actually diminish, and which Derek had known was formidable enough that he had tried to legally nullify it before I came home. He had tried to make me invisible because he was afraid of what I would do when I saw clearly. That meant he already knew what I was capable of. I stayed on the bathroom floor for another 10 minutes. Then I washed my face, went back to the guest room, and opened my laptop. I wrote for 2 hours. Not to Derek, not to a lawyer. I wrote a detailed timeline. Every account, every transfer, every date I could remember that corresponded to a transaction in the records. Every conversation Derek and I had ever had about finances, written down with dates attached. Every time he had steered me away from looking at account numbers. Every reasonable sounding explanation I had accepted without question because I trusted him. I wrote it all down. By the time Diane came downstairs at 6 in the morning and found me at the kitchen table with 3 pages of and a cold cup of coffee, I looked, she told me later, like a completely different person than the one who had arrived at her door. You look like yourself, she said, filling my cup from the fresh pot. I remember who I am, I said. She sat down across from me. Good, she said, because Bob called last night after you went to bed. He said something happened with Derek's accounts. I looked up. What kind of something? Diane allowed herself a small, satisfied expression. A freeze, temporary, pending investigation. Apparently, when federal agencies start asking questions about a power of attorney executed using the signature of a deceased physician, financial institutions get very interested very quickly. Derek had assumed that distance made him safe, that if he moved far enough south and started his new life quickly enough, Virginia would become something that happened to someone else. He did not know about the bathroom floor. He did not know about the 2 hours of notes. He did not know that his brother had called my daughter. He did not know that Susan Elliott, a woman I had known since our daughters were in second grade together, who had gone on to become a branch manager at a regional bank, had quietly flagged certain transaction patterns for regulatory review, and he did not know that in 36 hours. I was going to receive a phone call from the last person on earth I expected to hear from. The call came on a Thursday afternoon, 3 days after the account freeze. I almost did not answer. The number was unfamiliar, a Florida area code, and my first thought was that it was Derek's attorney reaching out directly. The idea of engaging with anyone on that side, without Bob present, made something in me go cold. But something made me pick up. "Mrs. Crawford?" the voice said. The voice was careful. "Controlled." "Female, my name is Vanessa Price. I know you have every reason to end this call immediately, and I will understand completely if you do. But I have something I need to tell you. And I hope, that it is something you need to hear." I did not hang up. I walked to the window of Diane's living room and looked out at the street. A neighbor was raking leaves in the pale October sunlight. Ordinary life. Continuing regardless. "I am listening," I said. Vanessa Price was 35 years old, a paralegal with 8 years of experience in real estate law, which now explained, horribly, how Derek had navigated the property sale paperwork with such apparent smoothness. She had met Derek at a continuing education seminar 18 months earlier. She told me she had believed she was falling in love with a man in a tragic situation, a husband whose wife had developed early cognitive decline, a devoted caregiver who had quietly, painfully made the decision to move forward with his life while still managing his wife's affairs responsibly. Derek had shown her what he said were my medical records. He had shown her my official Navy portrait and said, quietly, that the woman in that photograph was not really there anymore. He had described me with a specific combination of sympathy and sorrow that she now recognized as a performance. She had believed him because he was consistent, because he had a document for everything. Because practiced liars are not usually recognizable as liars until something breaks the pattern. The pattern broke when Vanessa went looking for a restaurant reservation on Derek's laptop. She was not snooping. She opened his downloads folder looking for a PDF he had mentioned. Instead, she found a folder labeled with her name. Inside, it was a blank power of attorney template. In the principal field, her name had been typed. In the reason for granting authority section, the same language appeared. Early stage cognitive decline. Capacity for financial decision-making compromised. Recommendation for immediate transfer of authority to the named agent, Derek Thomas Crawford. He had not even changed the language. He had simply replaced my name with hers. "He was going to do to me what he did to you," she said. Her voice was steady. I was next. I just came later in the sequence. The silence between us lasted several seconds. "Vanessa," I said finally, "I need you to speak with my attorney." "No," she said. "That is why I am calling. I have the template document. I have screenshots of text messages in which he refers to the power of attorney as protection for his financial transition. I have records of bank accounts opened in my name without my knowledge or consent." She paused. "I do not expect you to forgive me for not knowing sooner what he was doing to you. But I want to do the right thing now, and I believe that the right thing is to tell the truth." I thought about what Bob had said about the people who show up when things go very wrong. I thought about James Whitfield getting on a plane, about Gary Crawford calling my daughter because he could not stay silent anymore, about the particular moral courage it takes to tell a truth that implicates you, even when your involvement was born of deception. "I hear you," I said. "What do you need from me?" "Everything you just described," I said. "The template, the screenshots, the account records, all of it. Send it to Bob Haynes in Hampton tonight." "I will send it tonight," she said. "One more good question," I said. "Yes. Are you safe where you are right now?" A pause. "He left 3 days ago, when the account freeze happened. He left without telling me. I have not heard from him since." Derek had abandoned her the moment she became inconvenient rather than useful, the same way he had left me. Some people do not change. They only move. Send everything to Bob, I said. And Vanessa. Thank you for calling. After I hung up, I called Claire. You are not going to believe who just contacted me, I said. Claire was quiet for a moment. Then she said, Vanessa Price. I blinked. How did you know? Because I sent her your number, Claire said simply. 3 days ago, after the account freeze. I found her through Derek's real estate contacts and sent her a message explaining what had happened to you. I thought she deserved to know what he was. And I thought that if she had any integrity at all, she would call. My daughter, 23 years old, pre-law, building a legal case while attending school full-time. Claire, I said. Yes, Mom, you are going to make a terrifying attorney. A short pause. Then the first real laugh I had heard from her in weeks. I learned from the best, she said. The formal proceedings began on a Tuesday morning in December, in a conference room at a law office in Virginia Beach. Bob had told me not to expect a courtroom. No gavel, no gallery. No dramatic moments orchestrated for maximum effect. Real legal proceedings, he had said, look like accountants in a room. And he was right. The table was long and beige. The chairs were ergonomic. Water pitchers sat at intervals, and a whiteboard at one end had nothing written on it. Derek arrived with his attorney, a man from Sarasota named Theodore Graham, who wore a very good suit and had the confident bearing of someone accustomed to winning on procedural points. Derek sat across the table from me for the first time in over a year. I had thought, in the weeks leading up to this, about what it would feel like, whether I would feel rage, whether I would feel grief, whether seeing his face would undo the composure I had rebuilt so carefully from the bathroom floor outward. What I actually felt was something closer to clarity. He looked smaller than I remembered. Not physically diminished, but reduced somehow. The way things look when you finally see them without the distortion of love. Theodore Graham opened with an argument I had been warned about but still found remarkable to witness in person. He described Derek as a man who had been left to manage an overwhelming domestic situation alone, year after year, while his wife prioritized her military career. He used the phrase de facto single parent. He implied that the financial decisions Derek had made, while perhaps imperfect in execution, were the understandable responses of a man under sustained and unacknowledged pressure. He used the word abandoned in reference to me. Twice. Bob did not react. He made a small note on his legal pad and let Theodore finish. Then Bob stood and said simply, I have requested permission to include character evidence in response to the opposing characterization of Mrs. Crawford's conduct as a spouse and parent. 3 witnesses have traveled to be present today. Theodore objected. Bob noted pleasantly that opposing counsel had just described a decorated Navy commander as someone who had abandoned her family. He was simply offering relevant evidence to the contrary. The door opened. Captain James Whitfield entered first, in his dress uniform. He was followed by Senior Chief Petty Officer Diane Calloway and Lieutenant Commander Paul Reeves. They stood at the end of the conference table with the particular stillness of people accustomed to being the calmest presence in difficult situations. Theodore Graham looked at them. Then he looked at his notepad. He did not object again. Captain Whitfield spoke for 4 minutes. He described my service record with the precision of someone who had reviewed it recently and carefully. He described specific decisions I had made during the Pacific deployment, the kind of decisions that require not just training but judgment, the kind that separate competent officers from exceptional ones. Then he said, I would like to read a document into the record. He produced a single sheet of paper. It was a letter written by me, sent to Claire on her 14th birthday, which I had spent at sea. I had not known he had it. I had not known Claire had shared it with him. I sat very still while James Whitfield, in a beige conference room in Virginia Beach, read my words aloud in his measured, quiet voice. Most of the letter I will keep between myself and my daughter, but the closing lines he read are these. I know I am not there tonight. I know it costs something that I am missing this. But every hour I spend away from you is an hour I spend trying to make the world a little safer for the life you are going to build. I'll love you more than any rank or any mission or any deployment ever made or ever could. And I will always come home. The room was very quiet. Theodore Graham did not use the word abandon again. Vanessa's testimony took 40 minutes and was precise, calm, and complete. She presented the template power of attorney with her name in the principal field. She presented screenshots of text messages in which Derek described his arrangement as protecting my assets through the transition. She presented account records showing funds deposited in her name that she had never authorized. She did not perform. She sat straight in her chair and answered every question in a clear, direct voice and did not look away. When she finished, Theodore Graham requested a brief recess. During the recess, Bob found me in the hallway. He wants to settle, Bob said. I looked at him. What are the terms? He told me. I read the offer on his legal pad for 30 seconds. Push on the college fund, I said. Full restoration plus interest from the date of the first unauthorized withdrawal. Not negotiable. Bob smiled. That was already my plan, he said. He went back into the conference room. I stood in the hallway alone and looked out the window at the parking lot below. December in Virginia. Gray sky, bare trees. A few cars. Ordinary, unremarkable, and somehow after everything, beautiful in its ordinariness. I thought about Norfolk, about stepping off that shuttle with my duffel bag, calling Derek from the parking area, saying I love you to a voicemail. I thought about Patricia holding my sunflower mug in the doorway of my house. I thought about Claire opening her laptop in the diner booth, her hands steady, her voice careful. And I thought about this room, these people who had traveled and testified and shown up, in every sense of that word, because they believed that truth was worth fighting for. Bob came back into the hallway. They agreed. He said, let me tell you what justice looked like. Not the movie version, where everything resolves at once in a single satisfying moment. The real version arrives the way most important things do, gradually, in pieces, and still manages to be enough. The fraudulent power of attorney was voided completely. Every transaction executed under its authority was reversed or invalidated. The title company, the real estate attorney, and the bank that had processed the home sale were all notified of the fraudulent documentation. Patricia and her husband, who had purchased our house in complete good faith, were compensated fully by Derek, not by the court, not by insurance, by Derek, out of the assets we could reach. They received a refund of their full purchase price plus moving costs and were left in a better financial position than they had been before the purchase. Claire's education trust was restored to its full historical value, plus interest calculated from the date of the first unauthorized withdrawal. Every dollar my daughter should have had was returned, and several thousand beyond it in damages. When Bob called to tell me, I drove to George Mason and sat in the parking lot outside Claire's building and waited. She came out 20 minutes later with her backpack over one shoulder, not knowing I was there. I rolled down the window. She stopped. Then she walked to the car and got in. How much? She said. Full restoration, I said, plus interest. Claire pressed both hands flat against her knees and looked straight ahead through the windshield. For a long moment, she did not speak. Then she exhaled. A long, slow breath, and her eyes filled. My daughter, who had held herself steady for 8 months, who had attended class and filed documents and called attorneys and interviewed witnesses and managed her fear in private so that it would not become my fear. I reached over and put my hand over hers. We sat in that parking lot for a long time. My retirement accounts were fully restored. 18 years of military savings, completely intact. The military pension I had earned through 18 years and every deployment and every missed birthday and every ordinary evening spent thousands of miles from the people I loved. Returned to me in full. Derek's criminal exposure moved forward. The forgery of a medical document, the fraudulent power of attorney, the violations of the Service Members Civil Relief Act. Those investigations were not mine to control, and their outcomes were not mine to decide. But the documentation was thorough, and the violations were serious. Vanessa Price cooperated fully and received immunity for her testimony and evidence. She did not end up with Derek. She ended up with her integrity, which I believe is the more valuable outcome. Gary Crawford, Derek's brother, provided a statement confirming that Derek had discussed his intention to restructure the finances before my return from deployment. It was not enough to constitute prior knowledge, but it was enough to establish pattern and intent. Gary made a choice to tell the truth when the truth cost him something. I respect that more than I can easily express. In January, Bob handed me one final document, a formal letter acknowledging that Margaret Ellen Crawford had demonstrated no cognitive impairment of any kind at any point during the period in question, and that all medical documentation used in the execution of the fraudulent power of attorney had been determined to be fabricated. I folded it carefully and put it in my jacket pocket. Bob watched me do it. "Why that one specifically?" he asked. I thought about how to answer. "Because someone tried to tell the world that my mind was gone," I said. "And I want a piece of paper that says they were wrong." He nodded. "Keep it," he said. "You earned every word of it." In March, Claire was accepted to the University of Virginia School of Law on a full scholarship. She called me from campus. I was standing in the kitchen of my new house in Hampton, a smaller house, 3 bedrooms, back porch facing a stand of pine trees, a neighborhood where people wave when you walk by. When I heard her voice, I set down my coffee and cried for only the second time in this entire story. But these were completely different tears. I want to take the final minutes of this story to speak to you directly, not as a narrator, as a woman who has been where some of you may be, or where you are afraid of going. The first thing I want you to hear is this: financial abuse is abuse. I know that phrase can feel abstract. I know that when most people hear the word abuse, they picture something visible, something physical. But financial abuse is one of the most effective forms of control one person can exercise over another, precisely because it is invisible until it is too late. It happens in the form of reasonable sounding conversations. "Let me handle the accounts. You have enough to worry about. I will take care of it." If you are in a relationship where you do not have direct access to your own financial accounts, your own records, your own credit history, that is not a reasonable division of labor. That is a vulnerability. Please close it. Review your accounts regularly. Keep your name active on every financial document that involves your assets. Know where your money is. This is not paranoia. This is self-preservation, and it is your right. The second thing, a power of attorney is one of the most powerful legal documents that exists, and it is one of the most abused. A legitimate, durable power of attorney, especially one claiming medical incapacity, requires real documentation, legal process, and in most cases, your direct participation while of sound mind. No one can legally declare you incapacitated without evidence. If you ever encounter a document suggesting otherwise, about yourself or someone you love, contact a licensed attorney immediately. Do not wait. Do not assume it will resolve itself. If you are a military service member or a military spouse, know that the Service Members Civil Relief Act exists specifically to protect your financial rights during deployment. Know what it covers. Know how to use it. Those protections exist because people recognize that service creates vulnerability, and they fought to close that gap. The third thing, your absence is not an excuse for someone else's betrayal. There are people in this world who will use your dedication, your service, your time away building something meaningful as justification for what they take from you. They will tell themselves, and sometimes tell courts, that your absence created their problems. Do not accept that framing. The years you spent earning, building, and sacrificing belong to you. No one's choices made during your absence can change what you are owed. The fourth thing, and the one that surprised me most, help comes from unexpected places. The woman who helped break this case open was the last person I would have imagined calling me. She had every reason to protect herself and disappear. Instead, she chose the harder path, and her choice made everything that followed possible. The world contains more people of integrity than it sometimes appears when you are standing in a gas station parking lot on Route 17 with your entire life upended. Be open to that. Be willing to extend trust carefully, but extend it. The fifth thing, the last one. You are not diminished by what was done to you. I know that sounds like something printed on a coffee mug. I know, but I am sitting on the porch of a house that is mine in the spring sunlight, with pine trees in the yard and my daughter in law school and a future I assembled from wreckage. And I promise you it is not a platitude. What was done to me was a deliberate attempt to make me invisible, to reduce me, on paper, to someone who could not be trusted with her own name. It did not work. Not because I am exceptional, because the truth is more durable than any forged document, because integrity, once built over a lifetime, cannot be erased by a signature that was never yours. I came home from Norfolk expecting to walk back into my life. Instead, I walked into something I had to rebuild completely with my own hands, with the people who loved me, one honest day at a time. And what I found on the other side of that rebuilding is something I could not have imagined standing in that gas station parking lot. I found out exactly who I am. If you have been betrayed, if someone used your trust as a weapon, if you have lost something that should have been protected, I want you to hear this clearly. People who hurt us do not get to define us. The worst chapter of your life is not your final chapter. And sometimes the strength you need has been beside you all along. In my case, she was 23 years old, sitting across a diner booth with a laptop and 8 months of evidence and the absolute conviction that her mother deserved to be fought for. Take care of your finances. Know your rights. Stay connected to the people who will show up. And if something in this story raised a question about your own situation, please speak to a licensed attorney or a financial advisor. Not next week. Today, if this story stayed with you, please share it with someone who might need to hear it. Not for the numbers or the algorithm. Because somewhere out there, right now, there is a woman sitting alone at a kitchen table, staring at a document that does not feel right. And she needs to know that she is not imagining things. She is not alone. You were never supposed to be either. And one final word before you go. If you recognize patterns from this story in your own life, unauthorized access to your accounts, pressure to surrender financial control, documents you do not remember signing, please do not confront the person involved alone. Contact a family law attorney. Contact the National Domestic Violence Hotline at 1-800-7-997-233. Financial abuse is recognized as a form of domestic abuse, and there are trained professionals ready to help you navigate it safely. You do not have to figure it out by yourself. You never did. Thank you for listening to my story.
Before you go, I want to stay with you for just a moment longer. Not to summarize, not to repeat what you already heard, but to say something that I believe this story earned the right to say. We live in a world that moves very fast, that rewards confidence and penalizes vulnerability, that tells women, in 1,000 small and large ways, that the safest thing they can do is trust the people closest to them and not ask too many questions. Maggie Crawford trusted. For 26 years, she trusted. And that trust was used against her with extraordinary calculation. But here is what I want you to hold on to. Her trust was not her weakness. It was her humanity. And her humanity survived intact. What failed was not Maggie. What failed was Derek. Those are not the same thing, and it matters enormously that we do not confuse them. The first lesson this story carries is about awareness. Financial independence is not a luxury. It is not a statement of distrust toward your partner. It is a fundamental expression of self-respect, and it is one of the most important things any person, man or woman, can maintain throughout their life. Know where your money is. Know what documents carry your name. Review your accounts. Ask questions that feel uncomfortable. The discomfort of asking is always smaller than the devastation of not knowing. The second lesson is about silence and its cost. Claire carried 8 months of fear alone because she loved her mother and did not want to cause harm from a distance. That love was real and it was beautiful. But silence, even loving silence, has a price. If you know something is wrong, find the safest possible way to say it. Find the right person. Find the right moment. But say it. Truth that stays buried does not protect anyone. It only gives the harm more time to grow. The third lesson is about who shows up. When Maggie's world collapsed, she discovered something she had not known she possessed. A network of people who respected her enough to act. A commanding officer who put on his uniform and traveled to a conference room. A daughter who had been quietly, methodically fighting for her. A woman on the other side of the betrayal who chose integrity over self-protection. Pay attention to the people around you. Invest in those relationships. not because you are expecting disaster, but because the quality of your life in hard times is almost entirely determined by the people standing beside you in them. The fourth lesson is the deepest one. Your value is not located in your assets. It is not stored in a house, or a bank account, or a retirement fund. Those things matter. Fighting to recover them matters. But they are not you. Maggie lost her house, her savings, and her sense of safety in a single afternoon. She rebuilt all three. But what she never lost, what Derek's forgery never touched, was her integrity, her record, her relationships, and her mind. Those things belong to you in a way that no legal document can transfer and no fraudulent signature can take. And finally, forgiveness, in this story, did not mean reconciliation. It did not mean pretending the damage was acceptable. It meant choosing not to carry the weight of someone else's choices as if they were your own. It meant deciding that the years ahead would not be defined by what was stolen from the years behind. That distinction matters. Forgiveness is a gift you give yourself. It is not an obligation you owe the person who harmed you. Maggie Crawford came home from Norfolk expecting to walk back into her life. Instead, she walked into a fire. And from that fire, she built something stronger, smaller, and entirely her own. That is not a fairy tale ending. That is a human one. And human endings are the only ones that are real. The content you just experienced this story, these characters, these lessons was researched, developed, written, and edited entirely by hand, by a real human team. No detail was accidental. Every word was chosen with care, and every lesson was drawn from real patterns that affect real people every day. We built this because we believe that stories told with honesty and intention have the power to change how people see their own situations, and sometimes to change what they do next. Thank you for giving us your time. It is the most valuable thing you have, and we do not take it lightly.